made the investments necessary to ensure that we have the best trained, best prepared, best equipped fighting force in the world. But this year, the budget proposal by this administration signals to the world that the administration is not committed to invest in readiness, training, state-of-the-art equipment, and technological overmatch. With military investments in China and Russia continuing to outpace U.S. investments, I find it hard to believe that the requirements outlined by General Dunford just 4 years ago are no longer instructive. If anything, I believe it's likely increased. Competition with China requires a whole of government investments. We saw last week that the Senate made some investments on the non-defense side, and we must ensure investments in our military are just as robust. I look forward to today's hearing from each of you about the budget proposal, and in particular, how you plan to keep pace, or how we keep pace, and counter the threats from Russia and China while simultaneously cutting investments in defense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Leahy and Senator Shelby, for calling this hearing. I want to welcome our guests. Thanks for being here. I know Secretary Austin, this is your first appearance before the full Senate Appropriations Committee. Welcome. General Milley, you've appeared before our Defense Subcommittee several times. Welcome back. As our adversaries continue to invest in new capabilities, the United States' decisive military advantages is not assured. Today, I'm interested in hearing more about how the Department's emphasis on innovation and meeting the challenge from our top adversaries, including China and Russia, has directly impacted this defense spending proposal. While we're likely to hear a lot of debate today on what the total defense budget ought to be, it is not up to our witnesses to figure that out. Where Secretary Austin and General Milley can be helpful for this committee is with the question of whether we're getting the best bang for the taxpayer buck. In my brief time as chairman of the Defense Appropriations, I've seen troubling signs that this is not the case. This matters because the issues we deal with on the Appropriations Committee are not about pinching pennies or reviewing accounting procedures. It's about getting our troops what they need to do their jobs at the right time, at the right cost, so that they can be successful. To that end, it will also be important for us to understand the financial impacts of the administration's decision to retrograde from Afghanistan, both with respect to reductions in spending for in-country activities in Afghanistan, as well as cost increases for over-the-horizon support. And finally, we hope to dig in on your team's implementation of the department-wide priorities, such as increasing the DoD's climate resiliency, modernizing the nuclear triad, and what it means to divest from legacy capabilities, particularly when these divestments can have real impacts on our warfighting. Once again, I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today, and I look forward to hearing from each of them.
Thank you. And we've tried to follow the Office of Attending Physicians guidelines on the distance here. If anybody's not fully vaccinated, they are required to wear a mask. We'll have 5-minute rounds with, after Senator Shelby and I, our senators will go back and forth, will be recognized in order of seniority. If somebody misses their turn, they rejoin, they'll put them back in line. This is Secretary Austin's first time for appearing here before this committee, and I, as already told him earlier this week, I appreciate that. General Mark Milley has appeared before this committee in the past, but I believe, General, this is your first time as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and like the rest of us who support you in that position. So, Secretary Austin, please feel free to go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Leahy, Vice Chairman Shelby, Chairman Tester, distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the President's budget request for fiscal year 2022. I'm pleased to appear alongside General Milley, whose counsel has been crucial to us as we developed our budget and as we continue to defend this nation, which of course is our top priority. Let me say at the outset that I believe our budget request will help us to match resources to strategy and strategy to policy and policy to the will of the American people. This budget is informed by the President's interim national security guidance and my own message to the force. We believe that it funds the right mix of capabilities that we need most to defend this nation now and in the future. It invests in hypersonic weapons and artificial intelligence, microelectronics, 5G technology, space-based systems, shipbuilding, and nuclear modernization, to name a few. In fact, this budget asks you to approve nearly $28 billion to modernize our nuclear triad and $112 billion for research, development, testing, and evaluation, the largest R&D request ever put forth by this department. Our request also gives us the flexibility to divest ourselves of systems and platforms that no longer meet our needs, including older ships, aircraft, and ISR platforms that demand more maintenance, upkeep, and risk than we can afford. The department must be ready to keep pace with our competitors and, if necessary, to fight and win the next war, and not the last one. That's why we've commissioned a global posture review and a new national defense strategy, which will further inform and guide our resource decision. And this budget reflects our focus on the pacing challenge that we clearly see from the People's Republic of China, to include more than $5 billion for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative and DoD investments more broadly. Last week, our China task force completed its work, and I issued an internal directive kicking off department-wide efforts that will, among other things, help bolster our deterrence against the PRC and revitalize our network of regional allies and partners and accelerate the development of cutting-edge capabilities and new operational concepts. However, China is not our only challenge. Our budget also invests $617 million to counter the damaging effects of climate change and additional funds to prepare for future challenges like another pandemic. It helps us counter belligerents from Russia, especially in the cyber realm. And you'll see more than $10 billion devoted to cybersecurity, cyberspace operations, and cyber research and development. And with its emphasis on space, missile defense, and more sophisticated sensors, our budget will also help us counter the increasing ballistic missile capabilities of nations like Iran and North Korea. It funds a troop presence and counterterrorism capabilities in the Middle East and South Asia, and to meet the threats posed by not only by Iran, but also by terrorist networks like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and in Africa, like those posed by Al-Shabaab. And it helps us maintain the integrated deterrent capability and global posture necessary to back up the hard work of our diplomats, our allies, and partners. Now, I know that Afghanistan remains at the top of all our minds, and I can report that the retrograde remains on pace. We had a chance this week to update our NATO allies in Brussels, and I was encouraged by their continued support for the new direction that we are taking. We've accomplished the mission for which our troops were sent to Afghanistan 20 years ago. And I'm very proud of the brave men and women who made it possible and those who gave their lives for that mission. I'm also deeply grateful to the families of our service members who have endured so much as they sent their sons and daughters and husbands and wives into battle. We will now transition to a new bilateral relationship with our Afghan partners, one that helps them meet their responsibilities to their citizens, but one that will not require a U.S. footprint larger than what's necessary to protect our diplomats. And that's one reason why we're asking to move overseas contingency operations funding inside the budget. This will add greater transparency, accountability, and predictability to the budgeting process, and frankly, it's overdue. Now, this budget also takes care of our people. It increases funding to support in-home care and support, which has become increasingly important during the pandemic. We also seek to improve military base pay and retention bonuses and other incentives that will help us attract and retain the best talent. And we will be working hard to combat challenges that make service in the ranks more difficult for all the men and women of the department, from getting a better handle on the extent to which we experienced extremist behavior to combating sexual assault and harassment. We know we have a lot of work to do in this regard, and we're ready to do it. Chairman Leahy, members of the committee, we feel the greatest military in human history, made up of the finest men and women who have ever donned the cloth of their nation. We also enjoy a civilian workforce deeply committed to every mission that we take on. And no adversary can match the quality of our people. I am immensely proud and humbled to serve with them again. And I can assure you that the President's budget request for fiscal year 2022 fulfills our obligations to them and their families. I thank you for your steadfast support of the Department and for all that you do to ensure that we remain ready to defend this nation. And I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And General Milley.
Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And with that come two key tasks. Task one is to prepare to fight and win America's wars in order to deter our enemies. And key task two is to fight and win America's wars if deterrence fails. In short, it's prepare to fight a war and, if necessary, to fight and win a war. The United States military is a critical component of national power, which, in concert with our diplomatic efforts, economic engine, and overriding hope of the American message, that will in combination deter our adversaries and preserve great power peace. We are in an era of increased strategic competition. The current geostrategic landscape is witnessing rapid change, and the potential for increased threat to the peace and stability of various regions, and indeed for the world, is increasing, not decreasing. States and non-state actors are rapidly transforming technologically, and we are bearing witness to a fundamental change in the character of war. In particular, China is increasing its military capability at a very serious and sustained rate, and we must ensure that we retain our competitive and technological edge against this pacing threat, as Secretary Austin has directed us to do. Readiness, modernization, and combat power are key to deter war and maintain the peace. And equally important are the combat multipliers of teamwork, cohesion, and well-led units. We must resolve the issue of sexual assault and confront the issue of extremism. Both are corrosive to the very essence of what it means to be in the military, and they destroy cohesion, they destroy teamwork, and they reduce combat power. Additionally, we must continue to invest in leader development and talent management required for future operating environment. And finally, we must continue to nurture and sustain a key strategic source of our strength, which is our network of many close allies and partners around the world. The Joint Force appreciates the work that our elected representatives do to ensure that we have the resources needed to train, equip, and man the force in order to be ready. The days of the Budget Control Act, as noted, are over, and repeated continuing resolutions which eroded readiness are hopefully behind us for good. The Joint Force will deliver modernization of our armed forces and security to the people of America at the FY22 budget request of $715 billion. It is a significant commitment of treasure by the American people, and we know that it's entrusted to us, and we will work diligently to ensure it is spent prudently in the best interests of the nation. The FY22 presidential budget is a result of very hard choices in a year in which the nation has suffered economic hardship due to COVID-19 pandemic. In alignment with the interim national security strategic guidance, this budget delivers a ready, agile, and capable joint force that will compete, deter, and win across all domains anywhere on the globe. And we are postured for continued overmatch in the future. This budget prioritizes nuclear modernization, long-range fires, hypersonic technology, artificial intelligence, shipbuilding, microelectronics, space, cyber, and 5G. These investments, in concert with our recently developed joint warfighting concept, will pave the way for a joint force that will win any future conflict. The PB22 defense budget request increases the readiness of the force by developing a joint force of the future, ensuring our people are our number one priority, and positioning us to achieve through teamwork. Consistent, predictable budgets informed by the will of the people are critical to this nation's defense and to the health of this republic. And the passage of this budget in a timely way is critically important. The FY22 presidential budget strikes an appropriate balance between preserving present readiness and future modernization. It's a down payment on the investment to the future with a bias toward the future operating environment. It is now that we must set ourselves on a path to modernize the joint force, and this budget contributes to doing just that. Many enemies historically have grossly underestimated the United States of America and our people. We are ready now and will remain so in the future, and any adversary of the United States should never underestimate our military capabilities, our skill, our will, and our combat power. Our job as your joint force, our contract with the American people, is that we, the United States military, will be able to fight and win when called upon. We will support and defend the Constitution, always and forever, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you both very much. Secretary Austin, on Monday, you and Secretary Blinken joined the President at the NATO summit, where he called the North Atlantic Treaty a sacred obligation of mutual defense, and we've discussed that meeting. I've said before, and past Secretaries of Defense of both parties' administrations have agreed with me that our nation's defense is strongest when we invest not only in our military, but in our people and domestic priorities that are the hallmark of this democracy. The Department of Defense is part of a network of federal agencies, including Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, Treasury, Commerce, Agriculture, and more that seek to secure our nation and promote our national defense. Secretary Austin, do you agree that our investments in education, medical research, nutrition, economic development, agriculture, environment, and all these do enhance our national security, support our nation's defense strategy?
Chairman, I do. I think that one of the things that has occurred over the years is that we've fallen behind in our ability to produce enough scientists and engineers to be able to create the kinds of technology that we need going forward. So our goal is to make sure that we begin to reshore a lot of the things that we've exported to overseas capabilities in the past, and we'll need the technological base to be able to do that going forward. So I absolutely do, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And as a result of the unprecedented assault on January 6th of the Capitol, the National Guard spent nearly 5 months assigned to protection duties at the Capitol. Guard members from all over the country. The cost for that deployment is estimated to be over $500 million. And I know you were told the Guard would rightly be reimbursed for these costs. Senator Shelby and I are responsible for drafting a Senate alternative to the House-passed security supplemental. We have other urgent needs too: overtime, hazard pay, mental health services for our Capitol Police. All these must be met. My question for you is this: what happens if Congress does not pass a supplemental appropriations bill reimbursing the National Guard for these costs before the Senate and House go out of session in August? What's the impact on the men and women in the Guard?
Well, the short answer, Chairman, is that it will impact their ability in the near term to be able to train and adequately prepare the Guard for its future, for its current responsibilities. And I would just like to say, while I'm answering this question, Chairman, that I'm absolutely proud of the work that our Guard has done. And you mentioned the tremendous work that they did in the Capitol. But they've also, around the country, been very instrumental in helping us to get shots out and into people's arms during the vaccination effort. They've answered the call to fight fires and other disasters, and so they've been very busy. And we need to make sure that we have the resources required to ensure that we can continue to train and equip the Guard. So.
Well, I agree. I've seen what they've done in natural disasters in my own state of Vermont, but they're also in other states around the country. And General Milley, there have been calls to expand the defense budget. We face a dire outcome. But you said it's not simply about numbers. It's about having the discipline and the certainty to spend the money you have wisely. What are some of the consequences the Department of Defense faces, and by extension, of course, the men and women in uniform and their families, if we just simply put it on autopilot with a continuing resolution and stopgap funding?
Thanks, Senator. I think that if we go to a continuing resolution, it'll be a significant negative impact on the readiness and modernization of the force. Things like contracts for that we let in order to build new, bring in new equipment, etc. But also it'll have a negative impact on the training of the units from a day-to-day basis. We've gone through this drill several times over the past couple of years, but a continuing resolution is not a good course of action for the defense budget, in my opinion, and it has significant impact. With respect to your question on the National Guard, just one quick piece on that. As you know, the National Guard, they're all over the world. We have them committed overseas as well as domestically. They're a tremendous investment, big bang for the buck with the National Guard, both Air and Army. Over 50% of the United States Army is the National Guard. So if we don't get the $500 million to supplement for the deployment of the Guard in the Capitol, that'll have a significant negative impact on their ability to maintain their readiness as well.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, we have one thing we have in Vermont, we have a semiconductor fab that's part of the Trusted Foundry, as it is in many other states. We just passed a bill that includes $54 billion through the Commerce Department for such commercial fabs to revitalize and bring us up to date in microelectronics. But I ask, how is the department investing in such microelectronic technology? Because we're going on more and more networks, and we know that other countries are accelerating their use of such things. And I apologize to Senator Shelby for going over my time, but if you could respond to that, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've seen, there's $2.3 billion in this budget for microelectronics, and the Department of Defense is participating as a part of a whole of government effort to ensure that we begin to boost domestic production of key electronic elements that we know that we'll need going into the future.
Senator Shelby, we need to pause 5 minutes to fix a couple of microphones. Is that okay with you? Or would you rather take your time first? Why don't you go ahead with your question first, then we'll pause. Okay, we'll pause for 5 minutes to fix the microphone. And I have no idea how you do that. I'll leave that to somebody at a much higher grade. Thank you. Wait a minute, I'd ask Chairman Milley, is it working now?
Voice, but
Oh, there you go.
projecting.
Okay,
Is it working?
it's working. Senator
right.
Shelby, go ahead,
You're
sir.
born.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe his mic's working, General. Thank you. The department stated that it is prioritizing China as our #1 pacing challenge. I pose this question to the Secretary and to you, General. How does this year's flat defense budget adequately reflect that prioritization? What specific investments are we making to counter China's increasing military capabilities, and assuming it appropriately prioritizes China, what are we ignoring? Because we can't do everything with a flat budget. And I know some of the stuff you can't talk about in this hearing today, but tell us what you're prioritizing and why, and if you are.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. China is, in fact, our pacing challenge, and it is my priority focus. You've seen that through, quite frankly, our actions. My first overseas trip, along with Secretary Blinken, was over to the Indo-Pacific region. You saw me stand up a China task force that has helped to focus the efforts of the department on making sure that we're doing the right things to create the capabilities and develop the operational concepts that we need to be successful. In terms of specific issues or capabilities that we're investing in this budget, you see almost $21 billion for missile defense and defeat, $6.6 billion for long-range fires, $52 billion investment for lethal air force, $34 billion for effective naval forces, and $12.3 billion for effective ground forces. And that's in addition to that, we're investing almost $28 billion to modernize the nuclear triad. So I think when you consider that, when you consider the $10.5 billion that we're investing in things like cyber, what we're doing in space to create additional capabilities, we are investing quite a bit. We also invested $5.1 billion for the Pacific Defense Initiative, and I think the aggregate there really will generate a lot of capability that's focused on China.
Senator, could I make a comment as well?
Yes, sir, General.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead.
This budget biases future modernization. I mean, you always have to do future modernization, which is another word for saying future readiness, and current operations and current readiness. There's always a balance. Previous budgets biased the present. This budget starts leaning into the future, and it's now that we need to pivot because the future, believe it or not, is going to get here someday. And about 10 or 15 years from now, we will be in a world of hurt in the national security geostrategic world unless we invest in the modernization of the United States military. This budget specifically starts doing that in very explicit ways with explicit programs such as the Secretary just outlined. We are in the midst of a change in the character of war, perhaps the biggest change in over 100 years. And we are investing in hypersonics, robotics, 5G, microelectronics, and all kinds of investments in this. And this is the beginning of a pivot to a future U.S. military that will be able to maintain its overmatch in some future conflict against, for example, a pacing threat like China.
Secretary, do you believe that we're investing enough money or in your budget or proposed budget that for hypersonic weapons and also for the quantum computing? Both are very important for the future, as the General just talked about.
I think these are, thank you, Vice Chairman. I think these are both critical capabilities that we'll need going forward. In terms of hypersonics, we not only need an offensive capability, but we also need to be able to defend ourselves against a hypersonic capability generated by China or Russia. Okay. And I think this budget, Vice Chairman, gives us the flexibility to go after the right mix of capabilities that will need to be not only relevant in the future, but dominant.
Shifting a little bit, last month President Biden pledged his full support, quoting, to replenish Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system after significant numbers of rounds were used to shoot down Hamas-fired rockets. Secretary Austin, should we expect to
with
Thank you very much, Senator Shelby and Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin and General Milley, as you mentioned, the Department of Defense is focusing more on the Indo-Pacific and China. And I think we face, as a Californian, I think we face a challenging strategic environment, and that the United States has to be prepared to act in a region that's much closer in many respects to China than to the United States. So we need to be smart. We need to have conversations, and we need to be strong as well. And one of the things that has concerned me, I see a lot in the West about various countries having military-to-military meetings, interaction between various countries, and I don't see that with respect to us. What is the policy of this kind of mill-to-mill engagement by our Defense Department?
Thank you, Senator. I would just tell you that one of the strengths of the United States of America is that we have a lot of allies and partners who want to work with us, and we will be successful in the future. And one of the ways one of the means that's gonna create that success is leveraging the capacity and capability of our allies. As I pointed out earlier, my first trip overseas was out to the region, the Indo-Pacific region, where I met with our allies in in Japan and South Korea, and further travel to India to meet with our partner there, and just as recent as 2 nights ago, I was in a conference with ASEAN nations and exchanging ideas about how we could better work together. What I've done with the China Task Force is focused our efforts a bit more that in a way that will create opportunities for us to better partner with allies and partners in the region, because I think that's really, really important. But to answer your question, we've done quite a bit, but we will do a lot more because I think this is very, very important.
Thank you.
Could,
Please.
our Indo-PACOM commander, Admiral Aquilino, and each of the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, to include Joint Staff, we interact with all our allies and partners in the Pacific on a routine basis. Yeah, I think your question may be directed about China, though, specifically China, and that is an issue. And we need to improve our mill-to-mill relationship with China in order to be able to de-escalate during crisis and to understand each other better. I routinely call my counterpart, but we are not doing it at echelon, and we need to improve the speed at which we can communicate. So it's push to talk. I can pick a phone up, or the secretary can pick a phone up. We're working through that. We want to improve those systems. But you're hitting a very important point that will keep us and prevent any sort of great power conflict in the years to come. Those systems do need to get set up.
General, thank you very much for that. It's very much appreciated, and I think you're 100% on the right track. So thank you. General Milley, recent reporting claims that at least 1,900 U.S. military firearms were lost or stolen during the past decade. They say mostly from the Army. Explosives have also gone missing. The reporting also says that the Pentagon has not been transparent about this. California authorities recently found a stolen military assault rifle in Fresno that was stolen 8 years prior from Fort Irwin. In 2018, a Government Accountability Office report found shortcomings in securing weapons. So I would just like to ask you to briefly outline what is being done today to see that there are no problems like this and that weapons are well secured.
Yeah, thanks, Senator, for the question. First, we, the Department of Defense, and I can tell you everyone in the military wearing a uniform, from company commander, platoon sergeant, all the way up to myself, we take the security of weapons extraordinarily seriously. We've got an order of magnitude of about, call it somewhere around 3 million or so small arms. I'm not talking big ticket items and aircraft carriers and F-35. I'm talking small arms. What you're mentioning about rifles, machine guns, pistols, rocket launchers, the things that were mentioned in these reports. I've asked each of the service chiefs to go back and let's get the numbers, let's get the reports over to you to make sure that we can level set as to what's correct and incorrect. I saw the reports as well in the media. I was frankly shocked by the numbers that were in there. The reports I have from the services as of this morning are significantly less numbers than are reported in the media. That's not to say it's zero, but it's much less. So I need to square the balance here. I owe you a firm answer. As to what's being done, though, I can assure you that every company commander, every company grade officer out there that's in charge of an organization, every single month is doing a 10% inventory on their arms room, and they are required by law, by policy, by regulation to inventory and account for all of those weapons, anything lethal at all, to include explosives. If anything becomes missing or unaccounted for in any manner, shape, or form, there's a full-fledged investigation by CID as well as unit chains of command, and if anyone is found negligent at all, they are relieved of their command or punished in some other way. And if there's a criminal involved, for example, you mentioned Fort Irwin, there were people arrested, prosecuted, and currently in jail as a result of some of those weapons that you're talking about with the AK-47, etc. So everything is rigorously investigated. There are weapons that we can't account for, but I can assure you that we take it extraordinarily seriously, and I owe you the exact numbers that we're getting, and I'll get you those very, very quickly.
Thank you.
Thanks, General, for your very direct and honest answer. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein and Senator Collins.
Thank you. First, welcome, Secretary Austin and General Milley. We appreciate your service. Secretary Austin, the administration's budget prioritizes national security and homeland security spending last relative to seemingly every other area of the budget. That strikes me as not only unwise, but dangerous, particularly when we look at what the Chinese are doing. Mr. Secretary, one of the biggest mistakes in the budget from my perspective is the decision to cut a DDG from the current multi-year procurement contract. This reflects a broader trend of not making the investments necessary to build anywhere close to a 355-ship Navy that multiple studies have confirmed is needed. China, on the other hand, now has the world's largest Navy, has about 60 more ships than our own fleet, and has surpassed our own 355-ship goal. The Office of Naval Intelligence projects that China will have 400 battle force ships by the year 2025. DDGs are the workhorse of the Navy, and the Flight 3s will be the most capable ships in the world. And I want to stress that these are ships in production right now. They're not conceptual ideas or designs for a future ship. We need more DDGs patrolling the Pacific, not fewer. And it's surely significant that the Navy has listed as its #1 unfunded priority the restoration of funding for the missing DDG. My question is this: will you work with the committee to find ways to restore that DDG that has been cut and to meet the Navy's #1 unfunded priority?
Senator, you have my commitment that I'll continue to work with the committee to do everything we can to resource our Navy. We have the most powerful, we have the dominant naval force on the face of the planet. It has been so in the past, it is so now, it will remain so going forward. And I absolutely agree with you that 355 ships is a good goal to shoot for. And I want to make sure that that we have the right mix of capabilities. Size matters, but capabilities also matter. And so we're going to continue to work with the Navy and with this committee to make sure that we have the right capabilities in place. And our plan is to resource that DDG in fiscal year 23.
Well, an admiral once told me that quantity has a quality all of its own. That's always stuck with me. And I'm also very concerned about the impact on our industrial base. We only have 2 yards that build large surface combatants. And Bath Arm Works in Maine has hired 3,000 additional shipbuilders since 2018. It's working quickly to improve its productivity to reach 2 ships per year build rate. And it has a hot production line that's getting more efficient by the day. But if this budget passes, BIW is rushing toward a workload cliff that will lead to loss of jobs, reverse these productivity gains, and weaken the industrial base. So that's the other point that I would ask that you think about, the importance of that productivity. Just very quickly for General Milley, I described to you my very first trip to Afghanistan when I met in an army tent with the other members of the CODEL when Hamid Karzai had been smuggled back into the country. And we were allowed each only one question of him. And my question was, will you get girls back into schools? Will you reverse what the Taliban has done? I'm very concerned that Afghanistan is going to fall to the Taliban and that we once again will see the imposition of Sharia law and that girls and women will not be allowed to pursue an education or participate fully in society. Senator Shaheen and I have worked very hard about this issue and are very concerned. Do you have any comments in that area?
Well, I would tell you this, Senator. Your concern is a valid concern. There's a range of outcomes here, and without going into classified probabilities here of these outcomes, there are a wide range of outcomes that we've looked at, and we assess that based on risk. Right now, the government of Afghanistan is holding, and they have approximately about a 325 to 350,000 person security force, Army and police forces. There is ongoing violence, as we know, and we are drawing down our force. Now, the question remains, what will happen in the future? Will that military disintegrate? Will the government collapse? Will the Taliban come in? If the answer to that worst-case scenario is yes, then I think your concern is a very valid concern. What will happen to women and girls, and not only that, but many, many others, and they're probably going to be at risk. But I would also tell you that is not a certain outcome. There are many other outcomes that are possible, and we're going to work to try to have those outcomes achieved as opposed to the worst-case outcome. This is not a done deal yet. It's the President's intent to keep an embassy open, to keep our security forces around the embassy, and to continue to work with the Afghan government, to continue to fund the Afghan security forces, and to keep that situation from devolving into the worst case. And that's what we're planning on, and that's what we're working toward. There are no guarantees in any of this. You're right to bring it up as a concern, and we're working to fulfill that concern.
Thank you.
Senator, I would just add on by saying we really appreciate the bipartisan support that we've gotten for over the years for the women and girls in Afghanistan, and we're going to do everything within our power, as General Milley has indicated, to work through the embassy to carry forward with as much of this as we can. So.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and General Milley, for joining us. At least two of the pillars of our national defense are civilian control of the military and our ambition, goal, demand that those who serve in the military be nonpartisan and above politics. America is bitterly divided on political questions. What are you doing to make certain that our military is not infected with this partisanship?
Thank you, Senator. This is a very, very important issue for me. And also, I would add, General Milley, the military has been apolitical in the past. It is apolitical now, and it will be apolitical going forward. There's no place for politics in our military. I fully expect that all of our troops will have the opportunity to participate in the political process, but the military will. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that the military remains apolitical.
I can assure you as well, on the part of myself and the Joint Chiefs and the entire uniform branches, that is, we understand civilian control of the military. We are committed to being an apolitical military, and we will give our dying breath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America.
Thank you. A critic may take a look at our budget and say our national defense budget continues to grow to record numbers, even though we may retrench from time to time. But the real threats may not be addressed by this budget. It wasn't a hypersonic aircraft or a missile or a stealthy group of saboteurs who closed down the oil pipeline, the colonial oil pipeline, and really disrupted the American economy. And other vulnerabilities which we're obviously aware of are in the area of cybersecurity. What is our military doing to complement any other agency efforts in that regard?
Well, Senator, the military, as you've indicated just now, is one element of a larger government effort to ensure that we can protect our networks. We have the ability to engage adversaries in kind of a forward manner at the source of the mischief, and we have the ability to sustain contact with potential adversaries. So we're doing three things: protecting our DoD networks, adding to the overall effort that the government has in terms of defense against cyber attacks, and also remaining engaged with adversaries forward deployed.
And Senator, on the military side, as you know, we have Cybercom, and each of the service branches has cyber organizations inside it. We've got defensive and offensive cyber protection teams. We are very aggressive, not to be discussed in open testimony, but we are very aggressive offensively where needed and when directed, and we are continuing to build our defensive capabilities. The domain of cyber as a domain of war, as a domain of competition with adversarial nations, is a relatively new domain, and we are building those capabilities. We have the most significant cyber capabilities in the world. That doesn't mean it's perfect, and we witnessed what happened with the hackers in Colonial Pipeline, and we have to do much, much more. This budget puts about, I think, 2.3 or 2.4 billion into increasing our cyber capabilities just in the uniform branches. But there is a lot more work to do. There's no question about it, and this is an area in which we are vulnerable, and we need to continue to invest.
Someone may look at a $750 billion budget for our national defense and question whether we are wasting any money in the spending of that amount. My guess is we are, even with the best of efforts on our part. Both of you have extensive backgrounds and careers in the military. What would you identify as the largest potential source of waste in our federal military spending at this point?
One of the things that makes that is a challenge for us, Senator, is to be able to invest in the capabilities that we know that we need for the future, and as we do that, to divest capabilities that won't be relevant going forward. And so, as we hang on to systems that we know will not be relevant in the future, I think that creates drag on the overall budget. I think that that makes it more complicated for us. And so I would ask you and the committee to help as much as you can in terms of those things that we've worked with the services to identify that won't be relevant in the next fight. Help us to be able to divest of some of those systems.
Mr. Secretary, that was a very tactful answer at a congressional hearing. I would just add that I think our procurement process in this country is in desperate need of reform. We are wasting too much time and too much money in our procurement process, and the responsibility of changing it is in your hands and ours as well. Thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your leadership. Greatly appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, I appreciated the opportunity that we had for a discussion on some Arctic-related matters just last week. I expressed my appreciation for the department's initiative in this focus on the region. We have seen the service-level Arctic strategies released over the last year or so. Those have been good, actually exceptional. These strategies really give the attention to this region that I think we recognize needs to be a priority, or at least it gives the attention in writing. I was hoping that we would see the implementation and resourcing of these strategies reflected better in this budget request. As I look at it, it seems like we've missed the mark a bit here. I think we recognize we're seeing regional competition. We are seeing a level of activity in the region from those that who would have ever thought that the interest would be coming from China, that China would be resourcing, whether it is icebreakers, training with the Russians. We know, we can see what is happening up there. Senator Sullivan had an opportunity earlier this week, or last week, I believe, to question General Van Herk on how the services could use what was included in this year's budget request to implement their respective Arctic strategy. And his response was a little less than encouraging. He said, "I see an inching along. We didn't move the ball very far down the field this year in the budget with regards to resources in the Arctic." So the question to you this morning is whether you believe we do have adequate funding for the Arctic strategies in the budget. What can we do to use General Van Herk's words, to move the ball forward in the Arctic in a more responsive manner?
Well, what we can do, first of all, thank you for your support of our efforts in the Arctic, Senator. They've been tremendous over the years, and certainly they've helped us. You've helped us in a major way. As you probably know, we are in the process of developing a national defense strategy. My goal is to make sure that our efforts in the Arctic, our requirements in the Arctic, are reflected in that new national defense strategy. And so, as we do that, it will help us to better link our resources to our strategy going forward. And again, there is some capability there now, but I agree with you. We need to better resource our Arctic efforts in the future.
Well, as I've reminded folks when I start any conversation, right now the Arctic is not a hot spot, and I think we all would agree we want to keep it from becoming so. And readiness is what we need to speak to. I also want to raise the issue of mineral security in the context of national security. President Biden's executive order on America's supply chains required the department to produce a report identifying the risks in the supply chain for critical minerals. Your report states that the United States has always relied on imports of strategic and critical minerals to meet its public and private sector needs. We recognize that. We certainly have strong domestic supplies in Alaska and elsewhere around the country. So the question that some might ask is, why is this important from a national security perspective? What are the consequences if we fail to create a domestic supply chain? Because we can continue to rely on resources from others. I think we recognize that right now we rely more heavily on China for these critical minerals, particularly in the area of rare earths, and that creates a vulnerability. It takes us back to a time and a place where we were very vulnerable, very reliant on others for oil. We're kind of heading in that direction a little bit. We're actually importing more oil from Russia right now than we are from Alaska. So from a national security perspective, if you could just speak to the consequences if we fail to secure a critical mineral supply chain.
I think we've seen this play out in the recent past here. It's a risk to our national security if we don't have secure supply chains. And so what we're doing is there's $341 million in this budget that we've set aside to help us partner with U.S. companies. And part of that is designed to help us begin to establish our own capabilities for rare earth elements that can help us to maintain or create more secure supply chains. But it is certainly a risk if we don't have secure supply chains.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. And Senator Tester, the chair of the Defense Subcommittee.
Thank you, Chairman Leahy. And thank you all for what I've heard so far. I certainly appreciate the answers you gave to Senator Shelby in particular on his questions. This year's budget proposal includes numerous requests to divest legacy platforms all across the services for a projected total of $2.8 billion in savings in FY22. I agree with you that there are some old weapon systems that don't have a place in our next fight, and I've expressed this to you before, and I support that. But I also want to see the math and understand how these divestments were selected. For example, I want to know if our National Guard, which we all think highly of, is taking a disproportionate share of cuts as it applies to legacy systems. So Secretary Austin, when divestments occur, it impacts the resources available to our National Guard, potentially degrading force readiness. So how are you balancing finding savings to tomorrow's force with potentially reduced capabilities today?
Well, we certainly, everything that we do in terms of systems, we want to make sure that our Guard has a capability to be properly equipped. And as the chairman mentioned earlier, you know, the Guard's not just doing domestic, they're not just involved in domestic activities. We have them deployed in a number of cases. They've gone to war with us over and over again with the active component. And so they need up-to-date, modernized equipment. And our goal is to make sure that they have that. And so retiring a system that's no longer relevant for the future does not impose necessarily a tax or a cost or a burden on our National Guard.
So I will direct this to General Milley just simply because I want to see if his mic's working. So do I see this incorrectly then, that you guys don't believe that the Guard is taking a more of a cut as it applies to legacy than active duty?
Yeah, I'll check the specific numbers, but I do not have the impression that the Guard has taken a disproportionate cut of the divestiture. But the real message here, though, I think for the committee and for all of us, is we must pivot to a future military force. And yes, there are legacy, so-called legacy systems that are quite good. They're very capable in today's world, but they will likely not be as relevant in a future fight. We must invest in some of these emerging technologies of artificial intelligence, robotics, hypersonics, and so on. We must do that now. We cannot invest in horses when we're about to face machine guns and tanks. Those mistakes were made 100, 150 years ago. We can't do that. We must keep pace with the threat environment that's ongoing.
Thank you for that. I think it's an important message for all of us to hear, and I think we need to take it to heart. I want to talk about multi-year contracts for a little bit. It does apply to something that Senator Collins asked you about when I was out of the room. But at the Defense Department's request, Congress approved a limited number of multi-year procurement contracts. These longer contracts are a commitment to the industry to buy a certain number of ships, airplanes, missiles, and with the idea that we're going to save money in the long haul and give them certainty also. Secretary Austin, because multi-year procurement contracting authority is specifically provided by Congress at the request of the DoD, does the department have an obligation to fulfill multi-year procurement contracts once we sign up for them?
Thank you, Senator. The department has an obligation to provide the best mix of capabilities that we can possibly provide to our services, where we can, you know, if we have the ability to honor a multi-year contract, then I think that's exactly what we should do. If we have to make a difficult choice and invest in something else, then I think we need to be prepared to make that difficult choice, and certainly that we'll pay a tax for not abiding by that multi-year contract. But I think what's most important is that we provide the right capabilities for the service.
So I got you, and I agree with you. But I also have a belief that if we're going to sign a multi-year contract, we ought to live up to it, or we shouldn't sign it in the first place. you give me your thoughts on that? Because and the reason I bring this up, the department agreed to a Navy proposal not to fund 2 Navy's guided missile destroyers this year. That would break a multi-year contract. I think the destroyer that Senator Collins talked about is the same thing.
Yeah, so for the DDG, the tax for not complying with the multi-year contract is about $300 million. But when you compare that to a couple of $1 billion that you would have had to spend on that DDG,
Okay.
So I mean, we have to make choices, and in this case, we invested in a DDG, 2 submarines, and a frigate.
I got you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Graham.
Thank you. Thank you both for your service to our country. Secretary Austin, does the Department of Defense have a definition of what a cyber attack against the United States constitutes?
I don't recall a specific definition for.
Yeah, I don't either, and I'm not blaming you. We need one. Don't you think we need to define what a cyber attack would be and rules of engagement about how to respond? Do you think that'd be a worthy endeavor for all of us? And I'm not blaming you. I think all of us need to do this.
I think it certainly would be very helpful.
Okay, that's good. I'm good. I got 5 minutes here. Iran. Do both of you agree with the assessment by just about everybody in the intel world that the Iranians are trying to develop a nuclear weapon, not a peaceful nuclear power program?
I agree that if left to their own devices, the Iranians would acquire a nuclear weapon.
Yeah. General Milley, do you agree that's sort of their end game here?
Senator, I think yes, but I also know that I don't believe, and I haven't seen any evidence that they've made an actual national level decision to do that. But it is clear to me.
You need to check with the CIA.
Well, I have.
Okay.
And
So
I'm talking about a national strategic
yeah,
position.
well, I don't know how
They've set the groundwork.
Okay, where does the national strategic plan come from in Iran?
It would have to be the supreme leader of Iran make that decision.
I don't know how you determine what he says or doesn't say. So here's my belief. They're trying to develop a nuclear weapon, and I hope we understand that, because if we don't understand it, it'll be hard to stop them.
That's my belief as well, Senator.
Okay, thank you, sir. Afghanistan, both of you, how would you rate the likelihood of international terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS regenerating inside of Afghanistan and presenting a threat to our homeland or our allies, given what you see today? Is it small, medium, large? How would you assess it?
I would assess it as medium. I would also say, Senator, that it would take possibly 2 years for them to develop that capability.
Fair enough. General Milley?
I concur with that, and I think that if certain other things happen, if there was a collapse of the government or a dissolution of the Afghan security forces, that risk would obviously increase. But right now, I'd say medium, and in about 2 years or so. Okay,
thank you very much. Do you consider the border situation in terms of a 160% increase in illegal crossings in the last year a national security threat for the United States? Secretary Austin?
I think that we should be able to control our borders, and I would defer to Secretary Mayorkas.
Well, would you agree with me, General Milley, that 160% increase in illegal crossings does represent a threat?
Sure, I think there's a possibility or probability of contraband or people with malfeasance of forethought and criminals and terrorists and all that kind of stuff. That's all possible, and I think the border protection of any nation, the sovereignty of any nation, is a national security issue for any country, to include ours. I also think that the primary responsibility to do that is law enforcement for the United States.
I understand. We've taken $2 billion away from the Department of Defense to build a wall. Do you think we should, based on your assessment of the threat, do you think walls will help? Or are you just not able to give me an answer on that?
I think there's other ways to work to control the border, Senator.
Okay.
I'm not sure that a wall.
So you're okay with the Biden decision to stop building the wall?
I certainly support my president's decision,
Okay.
Senator.
All right. Thank you very much. China. General Milley, in the next decade, given what we see today, where is China heading in terms of their military capability?
China has announced publicly their intent to be a peer of the United States and to be militarily superior to the United States by mid-century. They have a program, a plan, if you will, national aspiration to do that, and they have a very, very powerful economy, and they intend to resource that to that end. That's exactly what they plan to do.
And our response should be?
I think it's incumbent upon us, the United States, to make sure that we maintain military overmatch relative to China in order to maintain peace and deterrence. If we fail to do that, it's my personal and professional opinion that we're going to place a future generation at great risk.
Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, and Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Austin, General Milley, thank you both for being here this morning. Over the course of the almost 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq, we've relied on our partners on the ground to help us, particularly in Afghanistan, where at the time the President announced the intent to withdraw, we had 18,000 Afghans in the queue who say that they are being threatened with harm to themselves and their families because of their willingness to help the United States. General Milley, you've stated that the department was rapidly preparing plans to evacuate Afghans that have worked with the U.S. government. Can you give us an update on those plans and whether you think we are in a position with what appears to be a rapid end to our withdrawal from Afghanistan to help those people who are in the queue?
Yes, Senator, and I said those remarks a couple of weeks ago.
You did.
Planning is ongoing. The Department of State is the lead agency to work with any host nation on the evacuation of citizens who desire that. In the case of Afghanistan, there's a special immigrant visa program. The State Department's running that. They're working it. We, the Department of Defense, we, the military, are in support of Department of State's plans. We're working at echelon, from embassy all the way up to Washington, D.C. Lots of planning is ongoing. Various contingencies are out there, and we have to wait and see what the situation is as it develops. We, the military, are capable of doing basically whatever is directed, and we're very confident we can do whatever is required.
Well, I have expressed my concerns to the State Department as well, and when I did that a month or so ago, I understood that there were 3 people who had been sent on temporary duty to help with the backlog. That is not going to get us through 18,000 people. And given the potential threat, I hope that DOD will coordinate very closely with state so that we don't have the kind of situation we had when we withdrew from Vietnam.
Could I, Senator, if I could, my professional opinion, I do not see that unfolding. I may be wrong. Who knows? You can't predict the future. But I don't see Saigon 1975 in Afghanistan.
Good.
The
I
Taliban
appreciate
are not
that,
the
and
North
I hope
Vietnamese
that's
army.
correct.
Yeah, the Taliban just aren't the North Vietnamese army. It's not a similar. It's not that kind of situation.
You have our commitment, Senator, that this department will do everything within our power to number one, support the State Department's efforts. If we're required to generate capabilities like transportation, whatever we're required to do, we'll be fully behind this effort.
Well, thank you. Just to follow up a little bit on Senator Collins' question about the impact on women and girls, and we discussed this, General Milley, several weeks ago, but are we working with our international partners to protect those vulnerable populations as we leave and once we have left?
I think we're doing we, the military, are doing everything we can to ensure that those that have worked with us and those that remain are protected to the extent that we have that capability to do that. But realistically, if we're not there, we're going to have very limited impact on the protection of those that are still in Afghanistan. And if certain scenarios unfold, too early to tell if that's going to happen, but if they did, then yes, your concerns and everyone else's concerns about women and girls are justified.
Thank you. I think, General Milley, you were talking about pivoting to future military force and the need to invest in hypersonics and robotics and AI. You also talked about that, Mr. Secretary, and I certainly agree with that. But as I look at some of the situations where our aggressors have been successful in the last decade, it's really been through hybrid warfare and gray zone efforts. And what are we doing to address those? Because as I look at the potential for Vladimir Putin to engage again in Eastern Europe, as I look at the potential in the Asia Pacific region, it's those efforts that I am most concerned about. And so how are we responding on those efforts?
On the uniform side, we just published, in fact, the Secretary just signed, the Joint Warfighting Concept. And embedded within that is a concept of integrated deterrence. It's a concept of globally integrated operations and gray zone operations, as you call them, and as we